There are moments in a concert hall when the music stops being sound and becomes something else entirely. Not silence, the opposite of silence. A presence. The kind of thing that fills a room so completely that the people inside it forget briefly that they are people inside a room and become simply listeners, which is the oldest and most honest thing a human being can be. The orchestra members of the Chicago Philharmonic had been professional musicians for a combined total of several hundred years. They had played under legendary conductors in halls that made this one look modest. They had performed the most demanding repertoire in the classical canon, with the polished, exacting command of people who had given their lives to a craft and received, in return, a mastery that most people only hear from the outside. They had never been stunned into silence by a man in a denim jacket and mud-caked boots sitting on a folding chair in the center of their stage. Until a Tuesday afternoon in March, when Raymond Cole walked through the service entrance of the Hartwell Symphony Center carrying a guitar that looked like it had survived several difficult decades, and changed something in that building that had not been changed in a long time. He was 53 years old, which was apparent from the lines of his face and the gray at his temples and the particular way he carried himself. Not old, not young. The age of a man who has been through enough to have stopped being surprised by most things, but has not yet stopped being interested in them. His jacket was the kind of denim that starts dark and fades over years into something softer and more particular, the kind you can't buy that way, only arrive at through time. His boots were work boots, genuinely worked in. He had been playing guitar on the corner of Michigan and Wacker for 11 years. Before that, for 7 years in Nashville, where he had come close enough to a different life that he could still feel the edges of it when the weather changed. Before Nashville, a childhood in rural Tennessee in a house where music was the only thing that cost nothing and gave everything, where his father played fiddle on the porch on summer evenings, and the sound of it carried down the road and people slowed their cars without knowing why. He had a daughter, Clara, 26, a kindergarten teacher in Evanston who called every Sunday and who had her mother's laugh in her father's ear, which was the combination Raymond considered most fortunate of all the things she'd inherited. Her mother had been gone for 8 years quietly, from an illness that had taken its time, and been endured with a grace that Raymond still thought about when he needed to remember what grace looked like in practice. He lived in a single room above a hardware store on the north side. He had what he needed. This was not resignation. It was an accurate assessment made over years by a man who had learned the difference between what he needed and what he had once thought he needed, and found the first category considerably more manageable than the second. How he came to be sitting in the center of the Hartwell Symphony Center's stage on a Tuesday afternoon in March was the kind of story that looks like coincidence from the outside and feels like inevitability from the inside. The music director of the Chicago Philharmonic was a man named Arthur Bellman. He was 61, Austrian by birth, American by 40 years of choice, the kind of conductor whose name appeared in the same short list as other names that represented the highest level of his profession. He was precise, demanding, occasionally impossible, and possessed of an ear that his musicians described, with the rueful admiration of people who have been caught out by it too many times to doubt it, as simply unfair. He was also, on the particular Tuesday in question, in a state of creative frustration that had been building for several months, and that had expressed itself most recently in the cancellation of 2 rehearsals, the revision of the spring program 3 times, and the departure, under circumstances described officially as mutual, of his principal guest soloist. The problem was not technical. The Philharmonic's technical level was beyond reproach, as it always was. The problem was something Arthur could hear but struggled to name, a quality of the music that was correct in every measurable way and missing something in the way that only the unmeasurable things can be missing. A kind of hunger, a sense that the music came from somewhere real, from some place in the body and the life of the player that had been tested and found to still hold. He had said this to his assistant, Nina, on a Monday morning in February in the exasperated and approximate way he said things when he was working toward a thought and hadn't arrived at it yet. Nina had said, "You should hear the man on Michigan and Wacker," Arthur had said. "What man on Michigan and Wacker?" Nina had said. "I walk past him every morning. He plays guitar. He has something I don't have a word for. You'd know it." Arthur had said nothing. The way he received all suggestions from assistants, without commitment, without dismissal, with the private openness of a man who had learned over 60 years that good information arrives from unexpected directions. He had walked past Michigan and Wacker the following morning. He had stopped. He had stood on the corner for 22 minutes in February without his coat, because he had left the building without it in a hurry and had forgotten it entirely by the time he heard the music. And the music was what Nina had said it was, which was something Arthur had a great many words for and found, standing on that corner, that none of them were sufficient. He went back to the hall and called Nina and said, "Find out who he is." Raymond did not come immediately. This was the first thing that Arthur noted, with more interest than irritation. He was accustomed to being responded to immediately, and the experience of someone needing a week to consider an invitation was unusual enough to be informative. When Raymond came, he came to an afternoon rehearsal that Arthur had arranged as a listening session. Not a performance, not an audition, not anything with a name that would require the situation to be a certain thing rather than whatever it turned out to be. He simply invited Raymond to play in the hall with the orchestra present and see what happened. Raymond had looked at the invitation letter sent, because Arthur Bellman still believed in paper for important things for a long time. Then he had called Clara. "A symphony orchestra wants me to come play," he said. "Dad," Clara said, with the tone of someone who is not surprised by this but knows she needs to be careful about how she responds. "Yes, you should go." "I play on a street corner," Raymond said. "You play everywhere," Clara said. "The corner is just where you happen to be standing." He thought about this for several days, about whether the hall would change the music, the way certain things change when you move them from one context to another, losing the quality that made them true in the first place. About whether he was the kind of person who belonged in a hall like that, which was a different question, and one he examined with the honesty of a man who has had 53 years to learn not to confuse the two kinds of questions. He decided, finally, that the music was the music wherever he played it, that it had come from real places, from his father's porch, from Nashville, from the corner of Michigan and Wacker, from the particular long education of a life lived mostly in the open air, and that real places don't change based on the quality of the ceiling above them. He put on the jacket. He picked up the guitar. He walked in through the service entrance because that was the door Nina had indicated, and because Raymond Cole had been using service entrances his whole life, and saw no reason to change the habit for a symphony hall. The orchestra was assembled when he came onto the stage. 83 musicians in their chairs in their black, with their instruments. They watched him cross the stage with the collective attention of a room full of professionals encountering an anomaly, not unkindly, but with the frank, evaluating interest of people who are very good at what they do and are curious, on a technical level, about someone doing something different. He could see them talking. Small conversations, covered mouths, the thing people do when they're in a formal setting and want to communicate privately. He registered this without taking offense, because it was simply what people did when something unexpected arrived in their space, and because Raymond had spent 11 years being the unexpected thing in other people's spaces, and had made his peace with it. Arthur Bellman was standing to one side, not at the podium, in the posture of someone who has decided to receive rather than direct. He nodded when Raymond came to the center. Raymond sat down on the folding chair that had been placed there, a plain wooden chair, the kind of chair that exists backstage in every theater and concert hall in the world, and settled the guitar in his lap and was still for a moment. The hall was quiet in the way of a room waiting for something. 83 musicians, holding their instruments, not playing them. Arthur Bellman still. Raymond played. He played without announcing what he was going to play because he hadn't decided yet. He rarely decided in advance. The music, in his experience, told you what it needed to be when you put your hands on the strings and paid attention, which was a philosophy of composition that would have been incomprehensible in a conservatory and made complete intuitive sense on a street corner. What came was something he'd been working toward for years without knowing he was working toward it, a melody that had the shape of his father's fiddle music, the pentatonic bones of old Tennessee, but that had been slowly, through decades of playing and living and loss and recovery, grown into something larger and more complex. The way a river grows from a source that is nothing like the thing the river eventually becomes. He played it through once. Plain, clear, unhurried. The hall was utterly silent around him. He heard one of the violinists, a woman near the front, who would later tell a journalist that she had been playing for 31 years and had not cried at music since her conservatory graduation, make a sound that she immediately tried to contain. He played it through again, this time letting it open a little, letting the variations come that he'd been carrying for years. The way his wife used to hum in the kitchen, the particular pitch of Clara at 3 years old laughing at something on the floor, the sound of Michigan and Whacker in the rain when nobody was stopping, and he played anyway because the music needed to be played, not because anyone was there to hear it. He didn't think about the musicians around him. He thought about the music, the way he always thought about the music, with everything, because music had always been the place where everything was allowed. When he finished, he sat still for a moment, the way you sit after a piece that has taken something from you and given something back. The silence lasted longer than silences usually last in professional settings. Then Arthur Bellman said, in a voice that was considerably quieter than his usual register, "Again, from the beginning. And I want everyone to listen as if you've never heard music before." The conversation afterward happened in Arthur's office, with coffee that neither of them drank because they were too absorbed in the conversation to remember it was there. Arthur asked Raymond about the composition, how long, where it came from, whether it was written down. Raymond said it wasn't written down, that it had been arriving in pieces for about 12 years, that he didn't write things down generally because the writing tended to fix something that needed to stay in motion. Arthur listened with the absolute attention he gave to things that interested him, which was the same attention that had made him one of the finest conductors alive, and which he could not turn off even when he wanted to. "I want to record it," Arthur said, "with the orchestra. I want to build an arrangement around what you play, and I want to record it, and I want to put your name on it." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "My name," he said. "Raymond Cole," Arthur said. "Composer, guitarist, whatever you are comfortable calling yourself." "I play on a street corner," Raymond said. "You wrote something that made 83 trained musicians forget where they were," Arthur said. "I don't care where you play it." Raymond picked up his coffee cup and set it down without drinking from it. Outside Arthur's office window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in March, trying to decide between winter and spring and finding it a difficult choice. "Can I think about it?" Raymond said. "Yes," Arthur said, "but not for too long. I'm not a patient man." "Nina mentioned that," Raymond said. Arthur looked at him. Raymond's face, for the first time since he'd walked through the service entrance, showed something close to a smile. "She mentioned quite a lot, apparently," Arthur said. "She said you stood on the corner for 22 minutes without your coat," Raymond said. "It was cold," Arthur said, with the dignity of a man who is not going to apologize for this. "It was February." Raymond agreed. The recording was made in June, on 3 consecutive mornings, in the Hartwell Symphony Center, with Raymond Cole on his aging guitar in the center of the stage and 83 musicians arranged around him. The arrangement had been developed over 6 weeks of sessions between Raymond, Arthur, and a young arranger named Stella, who had the particular gift of hearing what something was reaching toward and helping it get there. Clara came to the second morning's recording. She sat in the front row of the empty hall and listened to her father play, and she held her composure for the first piece and lost it quietly on the second, which was the piece that had the shape of her mother's humming in it, which she recognized immediately and completely. Across 20 years in a concert hall and all the distance between a kitchen in Tennessee and a stage in Chicago, Raymond saw her from the stage mid-piece. He kept playing. But he held her eyes for a moment, and something passed between them. The specific, wordless acknowledgement of a father and daughter who have carried the same loss and are, in this moment, carrying it together in public, in a hall full of musicians, in the presence of music that had been built partly from it. He kept playing. She kept listening. The hall held them both, the way good halls hold things, without judgment, without hurry, with the simple hospitality of a space designed for exactly this. The recording was released in October. The reviews used words that Raymond read once and then put down, because the words were about the music, and the music was already in the air, already beyond what any words could add to or take from. He was back on the corner of Michigan and Wacker by November. He went back because it was where he played, and because the corner in November, with the lake wind and the people passing and the particular quality of light that Chicago does in the fall, was as real as anything he'd done in the Hartwell Hall, and the music needed real places. People stopped longer now. Some of them recognized him. Most of them didn't, and those were the ones Raymond valued most. The ones who stopped because the music stopped them, without any frame around it, without any context except the sound and the corner and a man in a faded denim jacket playing something that had taken 53 years to arrive at and would take more years still to finish. He was not finished. He knew this with the certainty of someone who has learned that the best work is always unfinished, always reaching, always slightly ahead of where you are. He played. The city moved around him. The music went where it went. And that was entirely enough.